His body was still, just ears twitching above the ice-gray water. At first glance, it looked like driftwood, until the ears moved. Grayson froze on the snowy bank, eyes locked on the impossible. A bobcat kitten, drowning, alone, dying. In that split second, instinct screamed, boots hit the snow, and breath vanished beneath freezing water. What he pulled out changed everything, not just for the kitten, but for him too. This wasn't just a rescue. It was the beginning of something unexplainable. If you think animals don't remember love, wait till you hear how this wild one came back. The freezing lake encounter. Winter, silence broken. Sometimes the coldest moments reveal the warmest hearts. Snow had fallen all night across the Idaho wilderness, blanketing the pine forest outside McCall in a ghostly hush. It wasn't just quiet. It was the kind of silence that pressed into your ears and settled in your chest. Grayson Miller trudged through the woods in thick flannel and insulated pants, breath fogging with every exhale. At 38, he wasn't a man drawn to noise or people anymore. The world had taught him the weight of silence, and he had learned to carry it well. After losing his younger brother in a climbing accident 2 winters prior, he'd retreated here, to the edge of Payette National Forest, where cell service disappeared and memories stayed buried under snowdrifts. A small log cabin tucked against a ridge served as home. The only neighbor he'd had in 3 months was a red fox that occasionally wandered through his property. This morning, like every other in the last few weeks, he was headed to Crooked Lake, a half-frozen basin just under a mile from his cabin. It wasn't about the fish. Grayson hadn't eaten one he caught in months. It was about doing something that felt normal. In a world that no longer made sense, the rhythm of casting a line into still water gave his hands purpose. He reached the lake's edge just after sunrise. The sky was smeared in pastel streaks, blues, and grays bruised by the coming daylight. The water looked like glass, half-skinned with brittle ice. Pines circled the basin, stooped under the weight of snow. Grayson moved toward his usual spot near a fallen spruce log, brushing powder off the flat boulder he always sat on. He set down his thermos and fishing rod and sat, soaking in the view. But something shifted. There, just beyond the thinnest layer of ice, near the deeper middle. A shape. Small, dark, floating. Grayson squinted. Maybe a chunk of bark? A pine cone? Number. It was upright, sort of. Barely noticeable above the ice glint of morning sun, but it wasn't drifting. Wasn't spinning like a branch might. He leaned forward slightly, adjusting his position on the rock. Then it moved. Only slightly. Only the tips, ears. 2 little ears, twitching. Barely above the surface. Just peeking. Grayson blinked. Not a log, not a stick, not a dog. A kitten? His heart stuttered. Number, not a kitten. A bobcat. A wild, tufted-eared, spotted-legged bobcat kitten, struggling, no, barely surviving, in the freezing water. Grayson's gut tightened. A sick twist of panic rushed in, flooding his chest. The animal dipped under, slow and clumsy, then surfaced again, but lower this time. Slower. Each time it came up, it sank a little deeper. No cries, no splashing, just quiet, and the slow drowning of something far too young to die. Grayson didn't hesitate. The fishing rod hit the snow with a thud. Grayson's boots were already half kicked off by the time he was on his feet. No thought, no planning, just motion. He barreled forward through the shallow snow, the cold burning against his shins as he charged toward the lake's edge. His foot broke the brittle ice with a loud crack and plunged into the water. Then the next. With a sharp gasp, he dove. The water hit like knives. Agony clawed into his chest and lungs, ripped the air from his body before he could scream. But he kept moving, arms punching through the freezing lake, eyes locked on the tiny form ahead. It wasn't far, maybe 15 feet, but every stroke felt like it dragged 1,000 pounds behind it. The kitten disappeared again beneath the water. Grayson surged forward, heart pounding, vision narrowed to a single blurry shape beneath the surface. His arms wrapped around a limp, sodden body, no bigger than a loaf of bread. Wet fur clung to bones. The little legs hung like twigs. He turned instantly, one arm holding the kitten tight to his chest, the other cutting through the water. His own body wanted to shut down, surrender to the cold, but he fought it. Come on," he muttered through blue lips. "You're not dying today, kid. Not like this." His feet finally found the shallows. He stumbled out of the lake, soaked and shivering, knees buckling into the snow. The cold didn't matter. The pain didn't matter. He ripped off his jacket, his fingers barely working, and wrapped the kitten tight inside. Pressed it to his chest, breathing hard. The bobcat didn't move. No twitch, no mule. Just a limp bundle of bones and soaked fur. "Stay with me," he whispered. No time to check for breath. No time to wait. No cell service out here and no help. Grayson stood, barefoot, holding the kitten close, and ran. Through snow, through ice, through pain, and past the memory of grief. He ran toward the only thing that might still save them both. Home. Battle against the cold. The cabin door exploded open under the force of Grayson's shoulder, slamming against the wall and bouncing back with a dull thud. He didn't slow down. Didn't stop to hang his coat, kick off what remained of his socks, or wipe the blood from where ice had sliced across his bare shin. None of it mattered. Only the bundle in his arms mattered. The tiny bobcat was still cradled against his chest, wrapped in his now soaked jacket, limp as a rag. Grayson dropped to his knees just inside the door, panting, shaking, and clutching the kitten like it might dissolve into air if he loosened his grip. The cabin was dark and cold. Night had drained the warmth from the walls, and the fire in the hearth was no more than a dull shimmer of orange beneath a thick bed of ash. "Come on, hold on," Grayson muttered, more to himself than the creature. He laid the kitten down as gently as he could on a thick wool blanket in front of the fireplace. It was the same blanket his old dog Ranger used to sleep on. He shoved aside the memory and turned to the hearth. One hand grabbed the fire poker, the other the handle of the iron basket where he kept split logs. He stabbed the coals hard and fast, sparks leaping into the air. Nothing caught. "Not today," he growled. Grayson grabbed kindling, bark chips, anything dry. He struck a match with trembling fingers, flame flaring weakly. It almost blew out with his first breath, but he shielded it and leaned in close, lighting the kindling with slow, controlled puffs. The fire caught. Small at first, then bigger, then roaring. He turned back to the kitten, soaked, motionless, eyes closed, no breath he could see. Fur stuck to his ribs in soaked mats, spotted legs, tufted ears, a stubby, black-tipped tail. Grayson's hands moved instinctively, grabbing the towel he kept by the door. Thick, old, frayed at the ends, but warm. He began rubbing the kitten gently but firmly, starting from the shoulders, moving down the spine, then along the sides. The towel soaked fast, and he grabbed another. The pads of the kitten's feet were like pebbles, frozen solid. Grayson massaged them carefully, speaking in whispers. "Come on, little guy, stay with me." Still no sound, no twitch, no breath. Grayson leaned in and placed his ear near the kitten's chest. Nothing. Then, maybe, a flutter, a pause. So faint he almost missed it. He bolted to the kitchen, wrenching open the cabinet door. Old supplies clattered as he yanked out a metal thermos. He filled it with boiling water from the kettle, then poured it into a rubber glove, tied the top tight. He laid it against the kitten's belly, covering him with a second blanket. Then he sat cross-legged, eyes locked on the small, unmoving body. Every few seconds, he reached out, pressed two fingers gently against the kitten's ribs. Waiting, hoping, listening. A minute passed, then 5, then 10. The fire roared behind him, crackling and alive, casting warmth across the room. But the kitten... Still nothing. Grayson leaned back against the wall and closed his eyes. Just for a moment. He didn't pray. He didn't beg. He just whispered, "Don't go." Time had slowed into something cruel. Grayson didn't know how long he'd been sitting there. The fire crackled behind him, throwing flickers of light across the floor. His body had stopped shivering, but not because he was warm. He was simply numb now. He hadn't moved, hadn't blinked much, just sat there with one hand resting close to the kitten's side, his fingertips brushing faintly over the fragile ribs, hoping for a miracle. The tiny body still lay curled unnaturally, as if frozen in the shape of fear. No breath, no twitch. Just a terrifying stillness that grew heavier with every second. 30 minutes passed, then 40, then an hour. Grayson's shoulders sagged. He rubbed his face with both hands and leaned his head back against the cold wall. The heat from the fire warmed his legs, but not his heart. He'd seen enough death. He wasn't ready to lose this one too. But then, a sound. So faint he thought it was the fire. He opened his eyes, sat up. There it was again, not a cry, not a meow, just a breath, a flutter, like something small, gasping for space inside the world again. He leaned closer, heart hammering. The kitten's paw twitched, once. Then again, its chest rose, shallow but there. A broken whimper escaped its throat, thin, hoarse, and fragile as spider silk. "You're here," Grayson breathed, voice catching. He moved fast, carefully peeling back the top blanket. The kitten's eyes fluttered open, just slits, cloudy gold. They didn't focus at first, but they looked at him, right at him, not with fear, not with panic, just confusion, vulnerability. Grayson reached for the bowl of warm goat milk he'd prepared earlier, dipped a finger, and gently touched it to the kitten's lips. Nothing at first, then a flick of the tongue. Grayson exhaled hard, chest loosening, as if something had finally unclenched inside him. "You're a fighter," he whispered. He tried again. This time the kitten licked twice, then 3 times. Small, weak, but deliberate. Alive. Grayson smiled for the first time in weeks. The wild thing wasn't done yet. Naming the wild. The storm outside had deepened into a quiet, relentless snowfall. Inside, though, there was life. The Bobcat Kitten, still weak, still fragile, lay curled in the nest of blankets Grayson had built in front of the fire. His breath was shallow, uneven, but steady. His fur had begun to dry, revealing more of what he truly was. A young wildcat, no more than 6 to 8 weeks old, with pale golden eyes, oversized tufted ears, and spotted legs that looked too long for his small frame. The black-tipped tail, no more than 6 inches long, flicked now and then in restless dreams. Grayson sat close, legs crossed, just watching. He hadn't moved far since the kitten came back from the edge. There was something in the stillness between them, like they were both learning how to breathe again. He reached forward now and then, dipped his finger into the warm milk, and touched it to the kitten's lips. Each time, the response was a little stronger, a longer lick, a faint sigh after swallowing. It was more than survival. It was something resembling trust. Grayson whispered often, not because he expected the wild animal to understand, but because it kept the silence soft. "Easy now. You're safe. You're okay." By the end of the second hour, the kitten could lift his head for a few seconds. He tried to shift positions, though his limbs trembled with the effort. Eventually, he settled again, his side pressed faintly against the thick denim of Grayson's jeans. The man didn't move. He barely breathed. Because that simple touch, unsought, uncoerced, meant everything. It meant the wild thing didn't see him as a threat. Maybe not even as a stranger, Grayson looked at the kitten's face, the wide ears, the tiny pink nose, the faint scars along his shoulder where the mesh bag must have scraped. "You've been through hell," he murmured, and then, almost without thinking, he added, "You need a name, don't you?" The kitten didn't react, but Grayson smiled anyway. "You're no pet, but you're not just a shadow either." He paused, studying the little form curled against him. "Finn," he said softly. "Yeah, that fits." Morning came quietly. Snow still blanketed the forest outside the cabin, turning the pines into frosted towers. Light spilled in through the window, soft, golden, and calm. Inside, the world was different now. Finn was still there, still alive. Grayson knelt beside him again, cradling a small bowl of milk mixed with crushed chicken, warm to just the right temperature. He moved slowly, speaking in a low voice. "Morning, Finn." The kitten stirred at the sound. His ears twitched. He lifted his head, barely, but it was more than yesterday. He wobbled on unsteady legs and took one slow, careful step toward the bowl. Then another. Grayson didn't move. He just watched. Finn's nose bumped the bowl's edge. He sniffed, then licked. Once, twice. Then more sloppily, the milk dribbling down his chin, but he kept going until he had to stop and rest his head on the edge. "That's it," Grayson whispered, a slow smile creeping onto his face. "You're doing it." The kitten blinked up at him, eyes clearer today. No longer the dull glaze of survival. There was something behind them now, awareness, recognition, maybe even curiosity. Grayson sat nearby, close but not touching. He let Finn eat in peace, let him feel the warmth, the safety. When Finn finished, he took 2 more steps, unbalanced but determined. And then, unexpectedly, he curled up right beside Grayson's leg, pressing his small body into the denim like it was home. Grayson froze. This was a wild animal, a predator by nature. But right now, it was just a heartbeat beside his own. A soul that had chosen trust. "I guess it's you and me now," Grayson murmured, voice thick with something he couldn't quite name. He slowly laid his fingers near the kitten's back, close, not touching. Just there. Finn shifted closer. That was enough. The firelight flickered across the room, casting dancing shadows on the log walls. Grayson leaned his head back, watching the flames, and let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. The storm had passed. But something had begun. The memory of water. By the 3rd morning, Finn was walking. Not gracefully, not without effort, but walking. He'd pull himself up from his bed near the hearth, wobble for a moment, and then trail Grayson through the small cabin, soft paws barely making a sound on the worn wooden floors. He stayed close, but never too close. Just near enough to feel safe. Grayson started talking to him more often. Little things. What he was cooking. What the weather looked like. Nonsense half the time. "You hungry, kid?" "Looks like more snow's coming. This old kettle never boils when I watch it." Finn never responded, of course, but his ears twitched. His gaze followed. He was listening. Trust, Grayson thought, was growing slowly, like spring beneath the snow. But the cracks in that fragile piece showed up when the faucet turned. It was nothing dramatic, just a stream of water over his hands, rinsing a plate. But the instant the water hit metal, Finn went rigid. He stopped mid-step, back legs locked, tail low, ears flattening. Then slowly, deliberately, he backed away into the corner beside the pantry. Grayson turned the faucet off. "Hey," he whispered, crouching down. "It's okay." But Finn didn't move, didn't blink. His entire body was quiet, too quiet, like he was bracing for something. Later that evening, it rained. Not hard at first, but steady. As the drops picked up, Tapping against the roof and windows, Finn began to pace. Not wildly, not aimlessly. He walked a tight pattern near the back wall. His steps were cautious, nervous. Every glance at the windows felt like a flinch. Grayson kept the cabin warm, the lights low, the fire steady, but Finn didn't rest. And then, as Grayson was cleaning the table, it happened. A glass of water, half full, toppled. The splash hit the floor with a soft slosh. Finn was gone in an instant. Not just moved, vanished. Straight under the couch, pressed tight into the darkest corner, trembling. Grayson dropped to his knees but didn't reach. He sat quietly, back to the couch, eyes on the fire. "It's not the water," he whispered after a moment. "It's what it reminds you of." Finn didn't emerge, but Grayson didn't expect him to, because what he saw now wasn't just fear. It was memory, not a learned instinct, but a trauma burned in bone. That night, as the storm rolled outside and the fire hissed within, Grayson made himself a quiet promise. He would find out what had happened at that lake. Not for revenge, not for answers, but so Finn would never feel that way again. Grayson couldn't sleep. Long after the fire had faded into glowing embers and the storm outside thinned to a soft drizzle, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling. His thoughts kept drifting back to the lake, to Finn, to the stillness in the kitten's body every time water touched the air. It wasn't fear born from instinct. It was the fear of memory. So at sunrise, while Finn still slept, curled near the hearth, Grayson quietly packed a small bag. A thermos of coffee, his boots, a heavy coat. He stepped outside into the brittle morning cold, his breath clouding in the frosted air. The snow had stopped, but the sky was still gray, thick with winter's weight. Everything was silent. The trail to the lake was familiar. He'd walked it dozens of times to fish or to clear his mind. But today, every crunch beneath his boots felt heavier. He reached the shoreline and stood still. The lake looked peaceful, frozen at the edges, faint ripples catching the early light. But Grayson's chest tightened. He scanned the trees, the rocks, the bend where he'd first seen the bundle, floating in the water. And then he saw it, half buried beneath a patch of frozen leaves and snow. A torn, blue nylon cord. He stepped closer. Next to it, a shredded piece of mesh fabric, black, frayed at the edges. It looked like part of a bag. A pet carrier, maybe. And beside that, faint drag marks in the snow. Barely visible, but there, lines in the earth that led from the tree line straight down to the lake's edge. Grayson knelt. His hand closed around the cord, and a slow dread crept up his spine. Finn hadn't wandered into the water. He hadn't gotten lost. He'd been tied, bagged, left to drown, left to vanish. The image slammed into Grayson's mind, too vivid. A small body inside that bag, water seeping in, claws scratching, air running out, and no one to hear him. He wasn't supposed to survive. Grayson's jaw clenched. He looked out at the quiet lake, so still, so calm, but it had almost taken a life it never deserved to touch. He stood slowly, the cord still in his gloved hand. "I don't know who you were running from," he said under his breath, voice hoarse, "but you're not running anymore." Back at the cabin, the fire waited. And Finn, he was alive. Not because someone had saved him, but because he had fought to live. And that changed everything, learning to live again. The air was changing. Though snow still dusted the treetops and the nights bit with frost, there was something softer in the breeze, something shifting. Winter was loosening its grip. Inside the cabin, life was changing too. Finn had grown. In just 2 weeks, the fragile, near-lifeless creature Grayson had pulled from the lake had become a creature of movement, graceful, quiet, deliberate. His coat had thickened, the spots along his flanks darkening. He climbed higher now, onto windowsills, up onto shelves, even once attempting the kitchen counter, which Grayson pretended to be annoyed about. But secretly he smiled every time, Finn's eyes had changed too, no longer glassy with confusion or wide with fear. Now, they watched with focus, flicked with curiosity. He chased dust motes in sunbeams, pawed at stray threads in the rug. He followed Grayson from room to room with confident strides. But there were signs, subtle, quiet, that something inside him still pulled away. Finn didn't play like a kitten. He didn't meow, didn't seek out touch. He watched, he learned. He moved like a shadow, effortless, composed. And when he sat by the window, his ears twitched toward the woods. Grayson noticed. Each morning, Finn stood longer at the window, staring, not out of boredom, not for birds or squirrels, but as if something inside him remembered the trees. One evening, as the sun set behind the ridge, casting golden fire through the pine trunks, Grayson sat beside Finn on the rug. The kitten didn't flinch when Grayson's hand settled on the floor near him, didn't shift away when Grayson whispered, "You're not meant to stay here forever, are you?" The silence held an answer. Grayson leaned back, gaze soft. "You belong out there." Finn blinked slowly, his body still pressed to the floor, his nose twitching slightly. That night, Grayson didn't sleep. He stayed up sketching plans on scrap paper, rough drawings of an enclosure, something halfway between wild and shelter. Not a cage, not a trap, a threshold. The next morning he began building. In the clearing beyond the cabin, beneath a stretch of pine, he hammered posts into the thawing earth, created a space with open slats, covered shelter, pine straw for bedding. He left one side open, facing the trees. When he was done, he stood back and looked toward the cabin. It wasn't much, but it was enough, a choice. That evening, he carried Finn outside for the first time, set him down gently at the entrance. The kitten didn't run, didn't freeze. He stepped forward, and at the edge of the trees, he turned back. Grayson met his eyes and nodded. Finn disappeared into the woods, not with fear, but with purpose, learning to live again. The days were longer now. Grayson noticed it first in the way the morning light reached further into the cabin, slipping across the wooden floor like it was chasing warmth. The sharp bite of winter still lingered in the wind, but something was softening. Snow no longer held the trees hostage. It dusted them, light, almost gentle. Inside, Finn had changed too. He moved with more certainty. His muscles, once soft and trembling, had firmed into lean control. He no longer stumbled when jumping from the couch to the low windowsill. Now, he did it in one fluid motion, landing silently like he was made of smoke. His coat had grown thick and plush, cream along his belly and throat, deep russet on his back and legs with bold dark spots like pressed ink. His bob tail flicked with purpose when he observed the woods outside. Grayson watched him sometimes, quietly, from across the room. He noticed how Finn never meowed, never whimpered, never reached for affection the way domestic kittens might. But he listened. He watched. And sometimes, when the fire crackled low and the world outside went dark, he would curl up near Grayson's boots, just close enough to feel the warmth, not touch. It was a kind of love without need, presence without possession. But Grayson had begun to feel something changing. Not just in the seasons. In Finland, each morning the kitten spent more time at the window, not watching birds, not chasing flickers of dust, just looking toward the woods, toward the wind. Something out there was calling to him, not loudly, but consistently. One night, Grayson stood beside him. Outside, the pines whispered in the breeze, the last light of dusk painting the sky in pale gold. "You were never meant to stay," he said softly. Finn didn't react, didn't have to. Grayson understood. The next day, he started building. Out behind the cabin, he cleared a space near the tree line. He drove in wooden stakes, wove branches and pine boughs for cover. He lined it with burlap and straw. It wasn't a cage. It wasn't even a pen. It was a beginning, a bridge between two worlds, a place to return to, if Finn chose. That evening, Grayson opened the cabin door and stepped aside. Finn paused at the threshold, sniffed the wind. Then, without fear or hesitation, he walked forward. He didn't run. He didn't look back. But Grayson knew. This wasn't an ending. It was a first step. 3 days passed. Grayson kept the shelter stocked, fresh water, bits of chicken and warmed goat milk, clean straw for bedding. Every morning, he stepped out onto the porch and looked toward the woods. And every morning, the space beyond the clearing remained still. No tracks, no sound, no Finn. At night, he sat near the fire longer than usual, his gaze flicking to the door every time the wind shifted. He told himself this was right. This was what Finn needed. Freedom wasn't just about survival. It was about choice. But even knowing that, the silence hurt more than he expected. The cabin, once quiet with presence, now felt hollow. Grayson missed the soft patting of paws, the flick of a tail by the window, the silent company that made the space feel alive. On the fourth morning, just before dawn, something changed. Grayson woke with a strange sensation. Not fear, not noise, just awareness. He pulled on his boots and coat and stepped outside. The woods were still wrapped in shadow, the first gray hints of light just brushing the treetops. And then, movement. At the edge of the clearing, half hidden behind a tree, stood Finn. Taller now, stronger, his coat thick and gleaming, eyes bright and alert. They stared at each other across the snow. Neither moved. Then slowly, Finn stepped forward. He didn't approach the cabin, didn't meow or scratch at the door. He circled the shelter once, sniffed the food, lapped water from the dish. Then without a sound, he lay down just inside the enclosure, his body calm, his breathing steady. Grayson didn't speak, didn't move. He understood this for what it was, not a return to captivity, but a statement. Finn remembered. Not the warmth, not just the safety, but the choice, the trust. Every few days after that, just before dawn, Finn returned. Sometimes he stayed for an hour, sometimes less. He never entered the cabin again, never crossed that invisible line. But he watched. He listened. He chose. One morning, Grayson left a folded towel just outside the porch. He sat with his coffee, eyes on the tree line. And when Finn arrived, he didn't hesitate. He walked straight to the towel, curled up, and closed his eyes. Grayson smiled, tears welling but unfallen. This was their rhythm now. Not owner and pet, not rescuer and rescued, but something purer, something chosen, a wild soul who remembered kindness, and a man who would never forget what it meant to be trusted by something that had every reason not to, the bond that remains. Spring came quietly, not with sudden warmth, but with whispers, the slow melt of snow, the return of birdsong, the scent of thawing pine. Grayson noticed the way the light shifted through the cabin windows, the way the wind no longer bit, but brushed. Finn noticed too. He visited less often now. His body had grown sleek, strong, and fast. When he moved through the clearing, he was no longer tentative. He was a creature of the woods. But even as distance grew, presence remained. Grayson still left the towel on the porch, still set out small offerings, warm broth, bits of meat, sometimes just a soft whistle at sunrise. And Finn still came, not every day, not with fanfare, but often enough, and always on his own terms. One morning, Grayson sat on the steps with a cup of coffee, wrapped in a flannel coat. The air was cool, but not cold. Across the clearing, movement stirred. Finn stepped from the tree line, his body a ripple of power and grace. He walked to the towel, circled twice, then lay down. His eyes closed, his breathing slowed. Grayson didn't reach for him. He just sat, sipping quietly, their silences folding into each other like a shared language. "You're not mine," Grayson said softly. And you never have to be. Finn's ears twitched, but he didn't open his eyes. And in that moment, Grayson realized something deeper than relief. Pride. Not in himself, but in Finn. In what he had survived. In what he had become. He was still a bobcat. Still wild. Still haunted, maybe. But not broken. Never broken. And that, Grayson thought, was the true miracle. Not the survival, but the choice to return. To trust. To remember. Some people believe wild animals don't love. That they don't bond. That they don't feel the way we do. Grayson no longer believed that. Because every time Finn lay near him in the sun, every time he came back when he didn't have to, he proved otherwise. This wasn't about taming. It was about connection. The kind that asks for nothing and means everything. The seasons shifted once more. Spring gave way to summer, the forest thick with life, leaves full, birds in chorus, and wildflowers pushing through soft soil. The woods surrounding Grayson's cabin pulsed with motion. And still, Finn came. Not on a schedule and not with warning, but always when it mattered. Sometimes, Grayson would be chopping wood or watering the tiny garden he'd planted by the porch. He'd glance up, and there Finn would be. A shape in the shade, eyes like gold glass, breath calm, watching. Other times, Finn stayed just out of reach, lounging on the rock near the shelter, blinking lazily in the sun. He didn't ask for food anymore. Didn't need it, but he accepted it, sometimes. Out of familiarity, out of ritual. And perhaps, Grayson liked to believe, out of affection. There were nights when Grayson sat by the fire, door open, summer breeze drifting in. And in the faintest flicker of movement, he'd see the silhouette. Finn at the edge of the tree line, just watching. Not seeking, just present. One evening, a storm rolled in from the east, low thunder, wind churning through the trees. Grayson stood in the doorway, scanning the horizon. And there he was, Finn, sitting beneath the low limb of a pine tree, rain speckling his coat, eyes locked on the cabin. Grayson stepped out into the storm, boots crunching through wet leaves, heart tight. "You can come in," he called softly, even knowing he wouldn't. Finn didn't move, but he didn't leave either. And in that stare, across the wind and the water, and everything that had happened, Grayson felt the weight of something permanent. A bond that didn't need walls, didn't need words, just presence. That night, Grayson left the door ajar, and when he woke in the quiet just before dawn, he found faint paw prints in the mud just outside the step. Home isn't always a place with a roof. Sometimes it's a memory. Sometimes it's a heartbeat you never quite forget. And sometimes it's a wild soul who comes back again and again because they were once loved without condition. Grayson smiled to himself. Finn was gone again, but never far. Not really, because family remembers. Even in silence, even in shadow, even in the woods. Wild, free, and forever remembered. Years passed. The cabin remained the same. Aged wood, stone chimney. The same creak in the front step where Grayson always told himself he'd lay a new board and never did. The seasons came and went in rhythm. Thick green summers, blazing gold falls. Winters that wrapped the woods in silence and springs that whispered of renewal. But through it all, there was always Finn. He never stayed, never slept inside again. But he returned, in the hush before dawn, in the shimmer of dusk. Sometimes just for minutes, other times for hours. He never let Grayson touch him again, not fully. But once, on a still autumn morning, as frost rimmed the leaves and the world held its breath, Finn stepped close enough for Grayson to feel the warmth of his fur pass against his leg. A brush of trust, a silent thank you. Grayson never asked for more. He aged with the forest. His beard grayed, his back stiffened. But every time he saw Finn, strong, beautiful, free, it reminded him of something worth holding on to. That life doesn't always follow a straight line. that some things, even after being broken, come back stronger. Then one winter, deeper than most, Grayson noticed the silence stretched longer. No paw prints, no shadows, no eyes gleaming from the trees. He waited. A week, then two, then a month. Hope lingered, but it felt thinner, like the last ember in a dying fire. One evening, he stood at the edge of the clearing, a bowl of warm broth in hand, the wind sharp against his cheeks. "I don't know if you're out there," he said into the quiet. "But if you are, thank you." Not just for surviving, not just for returning, but for changing him. Finn had taught him that trust doesn't come when called. It's earned in stillness, in patience, in the choice to keep coming back, even when the world gave you every reason not to. Grayson never saw him again after that winter. But sometimes, when the moon was high and the trees whispered secrets, he swore he heard the soft padding of paws near the cabin. And in the morning, on rare occasions, faint tracks would appear in the snow outside the shelter. Never close, never obvious, but just enough, a reminder. And when Grayson grew too old to tend the garden, to fetch wood without pain, he still kept the towel by the porch, still set out water, still sat on the steps with his coffee. Because some bonds don't end. They settle into the bones of a place, into the heart. When Grayson's time came, neighbors found the old man peacefully in his chair by the window, a soft smile on his face, the fire still warm behind him. And beside the front step, barely visible in the dusting of new snow, were paw prints. Fresh, light, deliberate. No one could explain it. But those who knew him never questioned, because some goodbyes aren't endings. They're promises. And in the forest beyond the cabin, beneath the boughs of ancient pines, a wild heart still roams, free, unbroken, and never forgotten. Because love, once earned, never truly leaves. And